everyone, and welcome to the last Salesforce Blend webinar of 2024. I'm Lauren, and I'll be your host for today's session, where we'll be diving into Agentforce, the word on everyone's lips at the moment, and a very hot topic in the ecosystem right now. As many of you will probably already know, implementing Agentforce is an exciting opportunity to transform your Salesforce operations. However, as with many artificial tools, success starts with proper preparation. Data cleansing, careful planning, and involving the right teams across your organization. It can be difficult and a little bit overwhelming to know where to start, especially if you have unanswered questions. In today's session, we'll be covering the essential steps to ensure your data is ready, how to choose the right first use case, and what you need to know about Agentforce's rapidly evolving deployment landscape. Today, we're going to be joined by two experts from Validity, Chris Hyde, Senior Vice President and Global Head of Data Solutions, and Elliot Hogg, Senior Product Manager. Thank you both for joining us today. How are you both?
Very good, thank you, Lauren, and great introduction, thank you.
Very good. Over the next hour, Chris and Elliot will be sharing a real-world success story of an Agentforce implementation, and by the end of this session, you will understand the current state of play with Agentforce and how you can get started with this revolutionary tool. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Chris and Elliot to take you through the presentation.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for joining. If you haven't heard of Validity, we are a Salesforce ISV and have a number of applications on the Salesforce platform around data quality, which of course is a big topic we'll be talking about today, and also user productivity. As Lauren said, I'm Chris, Elliot is with me, and in our role, our product-related roles in Validity, we spent what feels like a very long time, but as we'll learn, it's actually not very long at all, thinking about Agentforce, looking at Agentforce, talking to Salesforce about Agentforce. We've probably said the word 10,000 times, and you've probably heard it way more than that. But in that, what we've learned, we're going to try and get across some of the things we've learned, some of the things that we've learned the hard way, and hopefully some tips and tricks on how you can not make the same mistakes we've made, but also understanding how super fast all of this is actually evolving. So let's have a look at what we're going to talk about. First of all, there's a lot of myths and misconceptions. You only got to go on LinkedIn, type in Agentforce, and you'll find people literally arguing about stuff that it does or doesn't do, or whether something's available or not, or whether you require certain things, or how much it's going to cost. And we'll dig into a couple of those things in a minute. Once we're done, we'll have a look at building your first agent. So what are the considerations? What are the things you have to think about? What are the gotchas? Where to get started? Where not to get started? Is now the right time to go build agents? We'll have a look at that. And, we'll look at the timeline of how long this thing's been around, and we'll look at what's coming. And then finally, we'll take some Q&A. We can see the comments as we go. So if you've got any questions as we're talking, please pop them up in the comments. We can see those come in. We'll answer if appropriate, and we can stop during the session. If not, we'll get to those questions at the end. So please make it interactive. We'll try and answer what we can. If we can't, then we'll take it offline and make sure we get back to you. Okay, so first things first, and this is kind of my version of the safe harbor statement, which we've all seen in Salesforce presentations, right? Agentforce is a moving target, right? This thing is evolving so quickly. It feels like we've been talking about it for a long time, but it has actually only been 60 business days since Agentforce was announced at Dreamforce back in September the 17th. 60 business days. And 30 business days ago, it was made generally available, right? That's literally 1 month, right? So it's so crazy. And during that time, and still going on now, there have been 21 World Tour events from Salesforce, Agentforce World Tours. They were World Tours rebranded to Agentforce in some cases, like London and New York, but 21 events in 16 different countries. And we're actually competing with this session right now for the keynote that's going on in the World Tour, Agentforce World Tour in Toronto, which I've just been watching, and a funny bit of information at the end to come from that when we get there. But there's lots more to come, right? There's still questions around how do we package this stuff up as ISVs or as partners. Testing, we've probably seen the announcement around Testing Center. That's really exciting. There's going to be more and more agents coming. There's going to be more agents coming from Salesforce, from partners. A lot of discussion early on around language support, right? It starts off only in English. What other languages are supported? What other languages are going to be supported? And as soon as early next week, I think it's Tuesday or Wednesday, the 17th, Mark Benioff will be announcing Agentforce 2.0, right? And what does that mean? And when in the history of ever has a product been released and 33 days later had a version 2, right? That's how quickly this stuff's evolving, right? So some of what we say today may not be true tomorrow. That's my safe harbor statement. Okay. Let's move on. A bit of a shout out for this section to Timo, who wrote a great article on the Salesforce Ben platform called 5 Common Misconceptions about Agentforce. 3 of mine that I'm going to talk about are the same as his. He has 2 different ones. I have 2 slightly different ones. But as I said, there's a lot around and there's a lot of people saying a lot of things and assuming a lot of things. The first being the most obvious, and I was at Dreamforce. We were both at Dreamforce actually for the announcements, been at several of the World Tour events since and other events. And I hear this a lot. This is just a rebranding, right? We went through Customer 360, we went through Einstein, we went through Einstein 1 back at TDX with Copilots, and now it's Agentforce. Is this just a rebranded Copilot? Well, yes and no, right? Yes, in the sense that Copilots no longer exist and agents do, but absolutely not in where the technology is at, right? The technology has come on. Imagine Copilots being version 1, agents is version 10, 15, 20 of that. And the primary piece of that, which you hear Salesforce talking about a lot, and is a whole nother session, but really worth going and digging into, is the Atlas reasoning engine, right? The ability for agents to think, right, for want of a better term, to reason, to go and get extra data to be able to answer the questions that you're asking in natural language, to reason which topic they should employ to understand how they're going to go and perform the actions that you're asking them to action. Okay, so it is new, but it's also a rebrand slightly, right? It's expensive. Yes, again, and no. I was reading a rather heated conversation on LinkedIn literally a couple of hours ago about someone saying, you know, $2 per conversation, that's ridiculous. Everyone's going to have to spend millions. But it depends which angle you come at it from, right? If I'm a service company who are paying a whole bunch of humans to sit on calls and on chat and answer questions, what is a human capable of, right? Certainly 1 phone call at a time, definitely not more than 1, maybe 1 phone call and 2 or 3 chat windows at a time in order to remain context and stay professional. And they have a cost, right? There is a human cost, and it's certainly a lot more than $2 per conversation if you look at it that way, right? So it's about the use case. If the saving or the revenue generation is greater than $2 per customer interaction through an agent, then it's worth doing, right? If it's not, then it's a business decision whether the ease of use or the time save is worth the cost. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go forwards, but there is a lot of consideration of what the best use case is to make sure it's not expensive, right? And it's value for money. And one of the things I've seen a lot is people saying, think of an agent as hiring an agent rather than paying for an agent, right? Think of what they're going to do instead of a human or to augment what your humans are doing. So think of them almost as a person cost. This is the big one, and again, it's yes and no at the same time. It requires implementation of Data Cloud. Agentforce uses Data Cloud to function. Right? Agentforce uses the trust layer of Data Cloud. It uses data processing capabilities of Data Cloud. Its conversational audit logs and all of that are stored in Data Cloud. But Data Cloud, as we know it, for a system to pull together data from external systems and all of the cost associated with that, the ingestion and all of that stuff, is not required. Okay, so if all of the data you want your agent to use is in the CRM, you do not have to implement Data Cloud. Okay, it is kind of part and parcel of turning on Agentforce. And with the Foundations, Salesforce Foundations package, then you get all of the capability you need in order to start with Agentforce. And anyone who is on Enterprise or above Salesforce platform gets that for free. Right? There's a $0 SKU, and you can literally just go and turn it on. Okay, 2 more. This one is interesting, and particularly I've literally just hung up on the watching the Toronto World Tour live feed just before this, and just as they were getting into the demo around SACs, and I've seen that demo many times now, and it's fantastic, right? Most people's first thought with agents, because we're used to it as consumers ourselves, is retail or chat bot type stuff on a retail site or on a service side, because chatbots then became co-pilots and now become agents. But at the end of the day, it's me, a human, talking to a system that is trying to do something for me, because that's where we're most comfortable. It's also, thinking back to the use case, probably where it makes most sense to deploy from a monetary perspective, right, and a cost perspective and a revenue generation perspective. And it also makes for great demos, right? It's really cool. If you haven't seen the SACs demo, go on Salesforce Plus, play it back. Listening to Sophie, the service agent, answer questions through voice channels and all that kind of stuff is really, really, really cool, right? But there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other applications of agents, both internal and external, and as capability augmentation for products that you already have today or maybe looking to go and get, right? So there's things we haven't even thought about at the moment. We, Validity, Elliot, myself, my team, we're building agents right now, right, for our products to augment some of the things that our products do. And I know many, many other ISVs are doing that as well. And then you've got to get into the question of, whether or not the use case stacks up, right, back to the cost of stuff. But there's also a whole bunch of partners out there, and you can go to the Agentforce Exchange. There is already, if you count the partners, pretty much 100 different things available, and there are hundreds more in the pipeline. Salesforce are working closely with many, many, many ISVs on agents and topics and actions and all of the things to go and build this ecosystem of agents. And it would be remiss of me not to talk about data, right? Data quality, that's what we do. We got a bunch of tooling around that. Elliot's going to talk more about that in a moment. But virtually every conversation about AI mentions data, right? We've all heard garbage in, garbage out. That has never been more true than it is today. We've all seen the horror stories of, old AI trained on bad data and all the things that go with that. But it requires perfect data. I shouldn't be the one to say this because I'd love you to go and get perfect data in your CRM and your connected systems, but it just doesn't, right? Because for two reasons. One, with the reasoning engine, and particularly if you have data cloud connecting external data sources, the agent has the ability to sometimes fill in the gaps, right? It can go and reason that it needs to get information about the thing you're asking it to do from somewhere else, from another connected system. And that may fill in some of the gaps of the data that's not there. What it can't do is make that data up, right? And all of these agents work within guardrails that you set. But if we're just inside the CRM, then yes, the higher the data, the quality, the better the agent is going to be, the more performant it's going to be, the more consistent it's going to be. But perfect data is impossible, right? So two suggestions. One, back to the use case. What data in my CRM or connected systems is required to fulfill this use case? Do I need to go and completely clean absolutely everything in order to do that? Or do I just need to go and make sure the stuff that's supporting the actions of the agent is clean and tidy and going to give me consistent results and all of those things? And it's about value realization, right? How much do you have to do in order to get value realization from the data set that you have? So hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to move on, switch gears slightly now and talk about building our, well, I thought we were talking about building our first agent. Elliot, why have you crossed this out?
Great question. And I think this is one of the big lessons that we've learned. And I think a lot of people have learned, right? Around the world right now, there are thousands, likely tens of, in fact, certainly tens of thousands of Salesforce professionals, new and old, trying to build our first agents, whether that's going through the trailhead that I think probably everyone's gone through in the past couple of months following Dreamforce to build your first agent, or whether that's, taking the steps beyond that to start looking at cases within our own orgs. And I think much like myself, everyone else has probably run into, let's go build it, because we want to go play with the technology, right? It's super cool getting your hands on with it, much like, when ChatGPT came onto the scene, everyone was in there asking it the most ridiculous questions, trying to come up with funny names for things, which we all still do today. And the Agentforce is no different, right? You want to build it, you want to be in there with the technology. But the one big difference, one big kind of consideration and learning that we've had is building your first agent. Building is not the right word. It's actually moving slower to begin with, to ensure you can go faster as you get towards the literal building of the agent. And this reminded me of one kind of principle that comes up a lot in technological change, whether that's within the Salesforce world. We've heard it related to data cloud, maybe an implementation of a new org, or maybe just general change management. And that's the 80-20 rule, right? Generally known as this kind of principle that's applied, where the 80% of the output is determined by 20% of the input. And if we think about, going back to the Saks Fifth Avenue example, we've all seen a lot, and the other companies such as the Open Tables of the world that are referenced by Salesforce, we kind of see the best possible results, right? We see that 20%. We see the shiny thing at the end, which is amazing, right? You mentioned earlier, the Saks example is awesome. I think we all are envious of, working with brands, whether it's in our personal lives or professional lives, where we can build and interact with that type of experience. But, focusing in on that and understanding how we actually need to get there, and what is that unique ultimate experience for our given brand and use case, that's so important. And there's a process that you need to go through to get there. So that's the process we're going to go through now, and specifically true to Agentforce, Dreamforce being and the announcements being 30 and 60 days ago as appropriate. Let's talk about that 80%. What's that groundwork that needs to go into place? Well, we'll touch on each of these, but at a very high level to lay the kind of trail we'll go through. The first one is discovery, right? What is our agent actually going to do for our organization? Very simply. The second is design. So what are the key components of a given agent, those topics and actions we've heard of so much, and much, much more? And how does it interact with the existing Salesforce platform and ecosystem, with that being, connectivity between those two worlds really being, why Agentforce is going to, move us into this new kind of generation in the coming months and much, much beyond. So once we have that designed, we have our agent, we then need to think about, great, we are connecting into that wider Salesforce platform to retrieve data, to change data, to create data, and much, much more. So we need to make sure that our actions are grounded in high quality data, right? And that's something we need to do as a prerequisite before we even get towards building. We will get there. And when we do get towards building, we'll have a quick chat about what can we do today, right? The reality is a lot of us can get building. What's challenging today, but how can we also see that be resolved and enhanced in the coming months, with everything being, moving at such a fast pace? And then lastly, we'll talk quickly about releasing and monitoring, even if this is months or quarters away or not even on horizon right now. Still an important thing to have in mind when we're going through steps 1 through 4. So let's move on to dive into discovery a little bit. And discovery is very simple at a very high conceptual level. And it's the really fun part, right? It's let's look at areas of our business and problems we can go and solve with this new technology that's being handed to us, right? And potentially solving problems we couldn't even think of addressing in the past. So where do we start? We start very simply, cross-functional stakeholders, right? These might be end users of Salesforce. They might be customer service reps. They might be sales reps that are using Salesforce day in, day out. It might be that you have a data governance committee and steering committee within your organization who are all too familiar with the data you have and the struggles you have. It might also be other teams that are driving customer communications, potentially even external to Salesforce, where that connection and daisy chain from Data Cloud through into Agentforce now unlocks new opportunities. That's going to be one of those key driving factors in uncovering use cases. Secondly, business objectives, right? There's been a huge shift in primarily leadership thinking, really, around artificial intelligence, as we've seen, right? It's on everyone's roadmap. Every CEO is asking their organization to come up with their AI strategy, right? It's every single company out there is racing to have one of these if they don't already. And I think that's marking a huge shift in a lot of the organizations that we speak to daily in the Salesforce world, where historically, it might be a new feature available in Salesforce. It might be a new initiative that the Salesforce professional, the admin, the architect, the dev wants to go and work on. A lot of the time, that's a kind of a motion of pushing upward, right? It's going up towards leadership and saying, hey, I really want to go and solve this problem with this innovative solution, and here's the return. This is really flipped on its head now. AI and Agentforce in particular, with the buzz that it's getting, is flipping that, and the pressure is coming from the top down to define this strategy and align it with objectives around enhancing efficiencies in certain areas, whether that's in customer support, one we've seen a lot around with the service agents now roaming the internet, including Salesforce's Help Center, which is a fun thing to go and play with, and like everyone else in the world try and break it, as I think everyone's tried to do. Thirdly is the use case library. There's much more available on this on the Salesforce kind of ecosystem as a whole. The use case library on salesforce.com has 58 use cases across 13 industries. It's inspiration kind of at a minimum, right? But there's also there are templated playbooks. You can download prompt templates from there to get going immediately. They're really easy to follow and a great way to get inspiration. And lastly, general existing processes where today we require humans, perhaps we require humans or not, but they take too long or don't get to the information they need to quickly enough. One example would be going and looking at logs for chatbots that you might have on your website today that are dealing with inbound prospects, maybe customers. Where are customers getting stuck? Where are they getting to that point where they start keyboard bashing, send me to a human? Right? Is that now a roadblock that Agentforce and the shift in technology can help enable some better outcomes? But ultimately, whichever one of it's, whether it's these four sources or more, these are all one thing. They're jobs to be done, right? And they can be incredibly simple. We've seen lots of examples within small things, right? Expense approvals, approval of holiday requests, little things like that, which on the face of it might actually be simple to get started. We'll find out shortly they're not so simple when you start then getting into the design, but that's what they all are. They're jobs to be done. So speaking of design, this is by far the largest step within the 5 from a build standpoint, and where we are spending as much time as possible. It's design, right? What are the key components of that agent? How do they interact with the wider Salesforce platform? And how do we ultimately get our users to the end goal that they desire, and perhaps we desire as well? And the best way to start this, and the reference that I always use now is, let's just look at Agentforce under the hood. Let's look at it this is an ERD, which is an entity relationship diagram that our friends over at elements.cloud put together, which displays really the metadata of an agent, the core components down the left there, but then how it starts to interact with metadata held across the Salesforce ecosystem and Salesforce platform for you today. And there's a really good article, again, I should say, on Salesforce Ben that was written by Ian Gotts, who's CEO and co-founder there. Ultimate Guide to Creating a Salesforce Agent. Really, really good article. Recommend reading it. Goes into this in much more detail than we will now. But a couple of things just to note as we run through this chain and think about design. First step is the agent in the top left there. So the agent, ultimately, that's likely going to be similar to a role in the company or a given business function, right? We've seen the agents that Salesforce have already either gone GA with in services case or have on the way: sales agents, commerce agents, marketing agents, right? Those are business functions. Human resources is one I've mentioned already when I referenced things like expense approvals or potentially annual leave requests, right? They're typically functions and roles within the company. Now, each of these agents, these people, if you want to think of it that way, those roles, they can have up to 15 topics. Topics are those jobs to be done, which we've likely already got a really good idea of from our discovery. So those are our jobs to be done. So these are the tasks likely delivered by a human today, which we're looking to agentify, right? Maybe completely or partially, right? And each of these can have up to 15 actions. So let's say that this one is expense policy, right? So we've got our HR agent, we've got our expense policy. We now go to look at the actions. The actions are the crucial bit. The actions are where this comes to life. And they are the most complex bit to ensure you're getting to the correct result. Actions define how your agent interacts with the Salesforce platform and ultimately how it takes action to achieve the end goal, right? Actions are stored within the action library, which means they can be used across many topics and agents within your org, so they're not unique to each specific agent you're using. And it's kind of important to ensure that this metadata, as we then move over to what these actions are, they can be flows, right? They can be Apex and Apex classes we already have available. They can be prompt templates. These three things, maybe outside of prompt templates, they are not brand new information to any, particularly Salesforce admin and architect out there, right? Well-established functionalities that we have within our orgs today and likely running our orgs today, particularly from a flow and Apex standpoint. When we're looking at this, right, that is then how we step through into that Salesforce platform. This is the game changer, right? The fact that it's interacting with data within our standard and custom objects. The fact that with the power of Data Cloud in the top right now, we can bring data from external systems into DMOs, data model objects, to then have those referenced in our flows, our prompt templates, our Apex. We can suddenly not only reference data and metadata within the Salesforce platform, but across any of our business systems, should you choose to use, emphasis, should you choose to bring in that data from Data Cloud. And obviously, as Chris mentioned right at the start, there's a data library up there that stores a lot of the logs and conversation logs from agents, but also what's going out to the LLMs from a zero copy data retention standpoint. So there's a big picture here. Personally, I found this diagram incredibly useful just to start sketching out what these examples might be, right? Sketching over the top of this. This is my HR agent. It works. Its topic is expense policies. I've got actions that need to both classify, but also look at each individual type of expense policy. It depends on the role of the person in the company that's speaking to the agent. It likely depends what country they're traveling to. It likely depends whether they're trying to book a flight or a hotel. Is it for a specific event, or are they just trying to go on a jolly on behalf of the company, right? There's a lot of things that need to come into play here, and it gets really, really complex. There is, I mentioned elements.cloud's documentation, particularly on Salesforce BEM. Likely when you get the level below, exploring universal process diagrams, so UPNs, they can really help you draw out that daisy chain of getting from here's my use case, those kind of if-then statements, to drawing the user through to that end desired outcome. Ultimately, the agent is there to get the user to the correct action. So this part of the process is absolutely critical, particularly making sure we have this right and that we have it documented so that when we inevitably have to come back and make changes down the line, we can do so, and we have a framework ready to adjust. So design, super, super important. We're now referencing all of this data within our Salesforce platform via our actions. So let's take that a little step further. We now talk about the data that we are inevitably going to be actioning. And because of the power available, we need to ensure that the data available is of a high enough quality to have our agent interact with it in the most appropriate way, dependent upon what you're trying to achieve. So let's just start with, how do we define data quality, right? Well, there are 6 different variables we look at a high level. The first of which is accuracy. And I always think when kind of considering accuracy, Netflix or any other streaming platform, other streaming platforms are available. Recommendations, I think pretty much everyone, if not on a daily basis, this has happened to everybody once in their life. You go on Netflix, you spend half an hour trying to find something to watch on Netflix. You find something and you only watch half of it because you've wasted half of the time looking for it in the first place, right? You can see here we've got top picks for Elliot, right? Recommendations. It might be product recommendations that we're making via our agent. Perhaps if somebody's returned an item to us and now wants, hey, what's the next best product that I can have? Having that data accurate is so critical for people's experience with that agent and with your company, right? If I go onto Netflix and I find something immediately in my recommendations that I love, that's good job, Netflix. But I think we all can feel the negative consequences if that doesn't happen that way. Once we have those accurate records, we now need to ensure we have enough information available, maybe to make decisions, right? And that's completeness. And completeness within CRM is often descends into debate and argument, as it's completely different by definition by the role. As a CRM admin and a Salesforce admin is concerned, completeness is likely the required fields are populated. That is a complete record, right? But maybe the sales manager thinks completely differently. Let's say discovery notes on our new lead records are required. Perhaps the sales manager mandates his sales reps to fill in 4 critical pieces of information in this free text field. Well, actually, if it's a required field, someone just dumping in the call has been done and saving it, as far as the admin's concerned, that's a complete record because his required field has got values, right? And as far as the system is concerned, it's a complete record. That's not the case, and it often leads to a huge amount of missing data within the CRM that fundamentally impacts people's ability to work with it, whether it's a human as an end user, a system, or now an agent, right? So getting a good picture, using a data assessment, like we actually offer in our Demand Tools product, it will give you a nice sliding scale of your record quality from unactionable all the way through to acceptable and validified. If you've got lots of missing engagement points, phone numbers, email addresses on those contacts and leads, if you've got industry, missing on accounts, right? Missing business segmentation, or just completely malformed data, right? Negative employee number, for example. All of that has a huge impact. So at this point, we have an accurate and a complete record. But we just don't want one accurate and complete record, right? We want this to be consistent across our entire org. And that's where standardization comes in, making sure that the basics, right, the simple things are taken care of. An example across the bottom here from Demand Tools modified data standardization module. We're taking our account names on the left and turning LTD into limited. We're standardizing our phone number to be UK's country code. We're standardizing our billing street into be proper cased, and we're standardizing our billing country to United Kingdom. There are a million ways to enter a billing country of the United Kingdom. We see 2 of them here. You could also have GB, Great Britain, England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, NI. There's a huge variation here that massively impacts, particularly your ability when discussing with an agent, how it should interpret that data, right? And taking it a step further, which is an angle we've only kind of started exploring recently, as an end user working with an agent, if I'm asking it to get information on specific accounts, for example, if it's giving me this information and saying, yeah, you've got 1 account in the United Kingdom, you've got 3 accounts in the UK, you've got 4 accounts in Great Britain, you've got 3 accounts in England, that makes me question the agent, right? It doesn't immediately make me question the data itself as an end user. It reduces my confidence in the agent, right? So there's a huge aspect here of making sure we're setting up our agent itself for success and adding guardrails where required. So at this point, we've got an accurate record, we've got complete records, and we've got consistency across our org. That's great. But what's the next step? The next step is making sure that we have unique records, right? We don't have any duplicates. We see at Validity anywhere from 10 to 30% of CRM records being duplicates on companies from 10 employees up to tens of thousands of employees. It's a perennial problem for any Salesforce org. And this causes huge problems for artificial intelligence and agents where it's not taken into account beforehand. Every time you go and speak to an agent, particularly if you're not logged into an account, which oftentimes you're not, right? You might be on an app, you might be talking to them on WhatsApp. They need a way to identify who they're talking to. And it needs to be unique, right? If they've got duplicates, that's a problem because often they're going to be asking things like an email address, maybe a date of birth, maybe your home address, maybe they know your phone number, so they use that. It's unlikely they're requiring, and you have an agent actually asking you, what your unique membership number might be, right? That causes issues because if there are two elliothogg@validity.com email addresses within the CRM org, and I speak to the agent and say, yes, this is my email address, the agent then goes, it finds two of me, which one does it use? Particularly, what if one of them's a customer and one of them isn't? Maybe I'm entitled to a higher level of service and I should be routed immediately to a human for one of my accounts, but not the other, right? Whilst you may think, but we can tell our agent if there are duplicates, use the higher account, but that doesn't necessarily solve the problem. At that point, you're introducing huge amounts of really what is tech debt and complexity to what today is a limited amount of instructions you can give your agent, particularly in the form of instructions and actions. So that's a huge problem. The next one up is timeliness. I think we've all can relate to this once again. In this case, we're sending an email. We've sent the email. I've forgotten the really important document that I said was attached to the email. Is timeliness. Having the right data in the right time. And this is really important when we're thinking about customer service agents, particularly in relation to things like product stock. Maybe, again, we're looking to do an exchange for a product with someone via our agent. That agent needs to know that you've got specific stock of a certain item in a certain size. It needs to have the right information at the right time. And this is an area, in theory, that Agentforce is going to really, really thrive if you're giving it the right information from across the Salesforce platform, and potentially and particularly if you're pulling in knowledge content from Data Cloud as well. And finally, the last one is validity. Pun pretty much intended here. One very key and core use case we've seen across the B2B world has been email addresses and emails, right? So I can now very quickly generate sales emails, whether I'm in Salesforce or in ChatGPT, to blast out a communication maybe to my set of key accounts or my leads. That's so easy to do. It's almost too easy to do, and too easy to batch blast lists of email addresses, and making sure that those email addresses, for example, are real, right? And on the right-hand side here, we can see Bright Verify for Salesforce, which is another Validity solution, kicking into action and saying, actually, this email address is not valid. It's likely that person's left the company. That then gets ahead of the interaction, allows me to understand, actually, this is not a real email address. I should not be including that in my sends. And likely, I should look to see if I've got a phone number for this given contact, or maybe look for other contacts in the organization who might have taken this person's role. These are not all things an agent can automatically do within a process. We have to set them up for success by giving good quality contact data. So those are the big 6 pillars that we look at when we're thinking about data when it comes to setting up our agents for success, and the types of things you need to consider regardless of whether your agent is internal facing, external facing, or whatever you're trying to do with them. We mentioned at the start of the session, building. Well, let's now talk quickly about building. Chris has mentioned this already. Build. Well, pretty much everyone can go and build today, right? Which is great. And it's just getting started here is a good thing to do after we've gone through some of the prerequisite steps, particularly if we're looking at a real use case of implementing an agent for our organization. We can all start with Salesforce Foundations if you've got enterprise and above. With Salesforce, it is literally a click of a button, potentially a quick conversation with your AE at Salesforce at the same time. And what we can all do as well, again, Chris alluded to this, is experience the learning curve with the rest of us. This is quite a rare opportunity for everybody in the ecosystem to get their hands on such an innovative and forward-thinking technology so early in its inception. And we're seeing the results of this. One of the topics that's quite hot, particularly in the Salesforce ecosystem and threads on LinkedIn, is around instructions, right? Those 15 instructions you can give your agent, which basically tell them what to do and what not to do. Do you add 15 separate instructions, which maybe contain one sentence each, telling it what to do and what not to do? Or do you add one long instruction that includes all 15 of those directives? If it's all in one instruction, it's going to take all of that information into account rather than potentially bouncing around and applying those other 15 separate instructions in a different sequence, which may well then lead to more consistent responses. Does it? Who knows? For some people it does, for some people it doesn't, right? There is no Bible of best practices on this stuff yet, because simply not enough people have got their hands on it. So learning with the community and engaging with the community on places like Salesforce Ben, as one example, is a really big thing to be doing here, particularly as we're starting that build and test process. And fast iterations, for those of you who have been in Agent Builder, you can iterate really quickly. And one thing just to keep in mind during this whole process is human in the loop, right? This is a concept that Salesforce have talked about a little bit. Human in the loop refers to making sure that there is always a human essentially reviewing the communications that an agent is generating before it goes out the door. In some cases, this is applicable to things like emails, right? If you're generating an email, probably a good idea to read it before you then send it to your 3,000 most important customers, right? It seems really simple. It's really easy not to do. And then asking, AI to then review that email that AI has just generated so it disagrees with itself, it's just not the best loop and cycle to get yourselves in. So making sure there is always a human in that loop where possible is a great process to take. But what's coming? There's a lot coming. There's a lot coming very shortly, particularly between now and Christmas, which again is literally around the corner. One of the things that's been really challenging for us, and we found the whole time, is testing, right? We can, in the conversation preview on the right-hand side, we can think of example inputs, maybe get ChatGPT to generate some inputs for us and enter them one by one and test. Well, the reality is we could give it the same prompt 10 times and get a varying level of response from it until you really kind of draw in the scope. But pressure testing at scale is not available today. Well, it will be very shortly. And I'll let Chris kind of go over that very, very shortly. But Agentforce Testing Center, this looks like a really, really cool next step forward and a critical one for those of us who are in the process of building agents and looking at bringing them to our organizations. Look at pretty shortly here. It allows us to generate up to 100 what's called test utterances, so test inputs to our agents. It will then make sure the agent is identifying a topic, identifying an action, and then providing the contextual and correct outcome. And you can follow the validation chain of all of that happening. It looks like a really, really cool enhancement to the agent builder ecosystem. And the final thing here is remembering the implication of iteration. I was quite proud of myself and I thought of that little rhyme earlier. Don't forget to return to the start. You will do it lots and lots of times, returning to discovery, to design, to data. That's why it's so important that this is all documented as you go through. But remember, if you're changing things, right, there are downstream impacts that we'll come on to into just a second. So let's talk about, now we have this out, what are some things just to be looking out for to round up my section here? The first one is obviously consumption, right? We need to stay on top of consumption. Is it cheap? Is it not cheap? As Chris mentioned, really depends upon what you're doing and the organization that you're in, right? Staying on top of consumption is so important. We have the digital wallet available to us in Salesforce, which allows us to look at usage, spot trends in usage, potentially adjust allocations of consumption. And this will evolve. This is one of the big moving pieces that we're still waiting to see where we're at in, I was going to say 2 months time, probably 2 hours time, right? 2 days time, 2 weeks time. Today it's $2 per conversation. What happens as the partner ecosystem begins to expand when it comes to agents for those existing packages you might have? This is going to be something to really keep your eye on. I suspect it's not going to stay as simple as $2 per conversation. That might be for good in some areas, it might not be in others. So something to always keep in mind, particularly after you've released. Education's a huge one, right? Because particularly for those internal and external agents, we may well be looking to expose, even internal, right? It's not just education of internal stakeholders of what this agent is able and should be doing for them, but it's also inspiring their confidence in what they're doing. There's a lot of noise out there around, privacy, ethics, trust, as there should be with AI. We're building on the Salesforce platform here, so we do, with the trust layer, have a huge take advantage essentially of the huge technological advancements and investments that Salesforce have made to put our best foot forward. So educating on topics like data masking, right? Like zero copy data retention as part of all of this, and grounding to ensure that your internal users can feel confident using your agent. And in speaking of those internal users, ensuring whatever works for you, a Slack channel, a Google form, a Microsoft form, maybe it's office hours, to ensure users have that direct route for feedback. As I mentioned earlier, it's so easy to iterate quickly here. The feedback loops are really, really important. Lastly, dependency monitoring. I mentioned this a little while ago. We have flows, we have prompt templates, we have Apex that's used likely across our entire organization. One little change in one of those, guess what it does? It can have a change in the output of the agent if you're using that action. So ensuring that you have the solutions in place throughout your development and deployment lifecycle to manage and monitor dependencies is so important. There's a load of really great ISVs out there who specialize in this. So I encourage you to head over to the App Exchange to look at those, because this is going to be a huge moving part as part of this as business or logic and requirements changes over time. The other things not mentioned here, obviously, we have all those logs going into Data Cloud. We've mentioned that enough times. That'll help you monitor those conversations without needing to have to go and speak to every single person with the agent. So that's the end of our life cycle, and some tips and tricks that we've kind of learned as we've gone through our process of implementing our first agents here, and maybe how we would do it differently. Definitely spending more time within design and data for sure. But with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Chris.
Great. Thank you, Elliot. Insightful stuff. We got a couple of questions coming on the chat. We will get to them in just a moment. I've got one more slide. Thinking about when's the right time to do this, right? At the beginning, Elliot talked about we all want to get in there and play. We all want to get in there and see what it does, a bit like we did with ChatGPT. And yes, now is the right time to go do that. Is now the right time to go build an agent and push it out to all of your customers? Saks thinks so. So in their use case, yes, absolutely it is. Is now the right time to be talking inside the organization, getting that buy-in, getting the understanding, doing the planning, doing the discovery, finding out what Agentforce could do for you? Yes, absolutely. And there is a lot of information out there, and a growing amount of information out there, both from Salesforce, but also in the community. But let's go right back to something I said at the beginning. And this thing is a moving target, right? It's what we talked about. Agentforce 2.0 will be announced by Mark Benioff on the 17th of December. You can go to Salesforce Plus and you can go and sign up for that right now. Excited to see what he's going to say, excited to see what's coming. The moving target is a fun thing for the next comment here. About 17 minutes before this webinar started, I was watching the live keynote from the Toronto Agentforce World Tour. and they announced a December 24th date for testing center. Elliot and I were talking an hour ago, trying to scour the internet to see if they'd released a date yet. And literally 17 minutes before we started, they released a date, right? So that's kind of help you understand just how fast this stuff's moving. Agentforce Exchange is growing. I mentioned that. There's new partner agents coming all the time. There's a hard push from Salesforce on us, the partners, to go get those agents in market as fast as possible. And they're giving us, some benefits around security testing and that kind of stuff to help us do that. And we are working with Salesforce on a weekly basis doing that kind of stuff. And what we'll see is there's a bunch of applications that you already have that people are going to agentify, right? They're going to add agents to those applications. So you may have add-ons coming to those applications you already use, which are going to make your workflows and use cases with those applications better. So keep an eye out for that. We talked about the numbers. Salesforce have a great ROI calculator. You can go and plug in, how much your people cost, your processes cost, what the agent's going to do for you, those kind of things, and come up with some tangible numbers around that. And that's immediately answers the question, is the use case we've discovered and planned and understood that we want to do, is it going to pay for itself, right? Is it worth it? And then Elliot talked a lot about data, and clearly, that's what we do, right? So data as a prerequisite, the data's got to be good. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it's got to be good. And you need processes in place to make sure it stays good, right? Because humans in the loop introduce more problems, right? People introducing data into the CRM or other systems cause more problems. Let's make sure that the data is in a good place, and you can get an assessment to do that. So the QR code takes you to one of our pages where you can get a demo of our assessment product. You can get to that and speak to our folks about any of this stuff we've talked about in more detail. But going to go quickly. We've got a little bit of time and go and have a look at the questions. So let's go right back to the top. So first question came in, anonymous, I'm afraid. As you mentioned, Agentforce is evolving so rapidly. What feature of the tool are you most excited about? So I'll answer very quickly. For me, because I'm talking, it's the testing center. The ability to generate 100 test cases and have that automatically play through the agents and see the outcomes, that's game changing, right? I've been in ChatGPT, I'm sure we all have. You ask it a question, it gives you an answer. You ask it exactly the same question word for word, you get a different answer, right? Now, Agentforce fixes a lot of that with the guardrails and with the instructions around how it gives its output. But being able to put that to the test in the 50, 100 different ways a person might ask the same question in a slightly different way, it's absolutely key, I think.
Yeah.
I think you agree, Elliot, right?
Yeah, 100%. I kind of said it during the presentation. That's definitely the one that I think is going to have the biggest impact for those kind of going beyond the kind of boxed in service agent that some people are using today.
Great. So next question, not sure if on the agenda, but I'd love to learn more about the out-of-the-box agents and if they're ready to be piloted with a client. So I think, are they ready to be piloted with a client? Those that are GA, absolutely. To learn more about the agents, I think there is a lot of resource on the Salesforce website, and that is growing. So you can literally go to agentforce.com and it will take you to the website. You can go and have a look at the agents that are there, the topics that are there. Elliot mentioned the use case library, which is really good kind of inspiration, and in a lot of cases will potentially help with that as well. Access to the recording, yes. So question was, can we get access to the recording? This is actually being streamed live on YouTube as well and will be persist on the Salesforce Ben YouTube channel. So that should be good. I'm not sure if we actually share the recording, but Lauren can mention that when she comes back in just a moment. Where are we? Alexandra, are there any statistics regarding the frequency of errors or misunderstandings in user interactions? I would love to see that. So I don't know if there's anything public. I'm sure we've seen some misunderstandings. And in fact, what you'll notice when you see these deployments, and Salesforce themselves did this on the Help Center, is there's a disclaimer. It's this agent is learning. If it gives you bad answers, we're sorry because it's still learning. And I see that a lot when you go, even outside of Salesforce, anywhere I see AI agents at the moment, there's always that disclaimer that it's not foolproof, right? So that's going to get better over time, and particularly in the Agentforce realm with the reasoning engine, because it's going to learn over time. But I think Statistics, who knows? Lots, maybe, right? I think that's it for the questions. Any more? No, I think we are good. So let me just say thank you again, Elliot, for joining me. Thank you, everyone, for sticking with us. There is one more questions. Sorry, just a sec, Julia, Lauren. What are some of the agents you've heard of being developed for the App Exchange? There is a big list. If you just go to the Agentforce Exchange, there is a list of something like 60, and there are a load more coming, and they'll literally be added day by day as we go in the coming days and weeks and months. So that's where the pulse is. Sorry, Lauren.
No, I came in a bit early, get one more question there, but yeah, thank you so much, Chris and Elliot. That was really insightful, and yeah, thanks for sharing your expertise. As you both mentioned, the product is really new still. Like, I know you shared some figures there, like we're talking days, which is crazy, and there's updates coming all the time. Again, shared some news hot off the press there, so it's important to keep up to date with all that news and fully understand how you can get started, and I'm sure the tips that you shared will help a lot. Hopefully. Salesforce pinning Agentforce is the future, so it's really necessary that you get up to speed and as fast as possible. If you'd like to learn more about Validity, as Chris said, there is the QR code on the screen, but I've also popped the link in the chat there for you. I also popped the link to the recording on this. If you want to share that around with someone that you know, or if you want to revisit it, then you can do that on our LinkedIn page or also on YouTube, as Chris mentioned. And finally, a big thank you to everyone who's joined us for this session. Your engagement and questions made this discussion about Agentforce even more valuable. As I said at the start, this is the last Salesforce Ben webinar of the year. So from everyone at Salesforce Ben, we hope you have a great and very restful holiday period. And we'll see you in the new year for more exciting webinars. Thank you both. Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.